Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our online event today. I am West End HBA First Vice President Terry Johns. We're excited to host our MTE Recreating Spaces public consultation webinar, featuring our four panelists, Justine Giancola, President, Ontario Professional Planners Institute, Vince Molinaro, President Molinaro Group, and past president of both our association and the Ontario HBA. Sue Westall, co-president Westall Homes and current president of the London HBA and chair of the National CHBA Urban Council, and Steve Robichel, chief planner and director of planning, City of Hamilton. I'd like to start by thanking our gold partner and today's presenting partner, MTE Consultants, for not only supporting our association, but making this event happen. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our West End HBA corporate partners. Diamond Partner, Enbridge Gas, Platinum Partners, BDO Canada, Bell Canada, the Hamilton Spectator, RBC Royal Bank. Gold Partners, Customer Insight, Cogeco Connection, MTE Consultants, Web ROI. Silver Partners, Reliance Home Comfort, Rogers Communications Canada, Star Metroland Media. Bronze Partners, Coast Wholesale Appliances, CoreSlab, DJB Chartered Professional Accountants, Federated Insurance, First Ontario Credit Union, Lowry Insurance Group, McHugh Whitmore LLP, Meridian Credit Union, Molinaro Group, and T. Johns Consulting Group. I'd now like to welcome our West End HBO CEO, Mike Collins-Williams, who, like myself, is a professional planner and a member of OPPI. I know it's always a good day when a webinar is full of professional planners. Mike?
Thank you, Terry. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the new CEO of the West End Home Builders Association. And as Terry said, my professional background is also an urban planner. I'm very much looking forward to meeting all of our members live and in person, hopefully very soon. But in the meantime, I wanted to say to the members how proud I am to lead this organization and how excited I am to have the opportunity to work on your behalf, supporting the development of much needed housing supply and to ensure that individuals and families continue to have choices at affordable prices in this quickly growing region. I'm also excited to jump into the discussion today that is relevant not only right here in Hamilton and Halton, but right across the broader region. I'd like to turn the floor over to today's presenting partner and gold partner, John Goodwin, Director of MTE Consultants, Inc., to say a few words.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone. I'm John Goodwin, Director and Principal at MTE Consultants. On behalf of my colleagues, I'd like to welcome everyone to our 8th annual Recreating Spaces event. MTE has been working with the WeHBA to put on this educational series since 2014 and have covered topics like Brown is the New Green on brownfield redevelopment, economics of building up, the move from low-rise to mid-rise and high-rise, the new places to grow legislation, building along the transit corridor, planning for LRT, and implore to restore reuse of our historical and heritage aspects. The series was meant to provide opportunities to learn from people who have found success in the topic areas discussed and foster good dialogue, questions to challenge, learn, and grow. Our panelists each year are sourced from around the province and from different fields to provide insight and challenge our thinking. For those of you that may not be aware of MTE or its many facets of service, just to give you a heads up, we offer civil engineering, structural engineering, geotechnical engineering, environmental risk assessment, hydrogeological, ecological, survey of geomatics, building restoration, and indoor environments. MTE is an employee-owned engineering consulting firm. Our close to 400 staff are trusted, passionate, responsible, collaborative, and honest people who are committed to communities across Ontario which we work and live. We are more than engineering. We are problem solvers, we are innovators, we are leaders, we are team members, we are owners, and we are community builders. And we do all of this because we care. It's simply that. We care about our communities, we care about each other. Our unparalleled commitment to caring is the foundation on which our entire business is constructed. It's our promise to our clients, our communities, and our people. So on to the rest of the format today. I'm just going to explain the format a little bit. I'm going to introduce each panelist one by one, who will each give us a brief overview of their perspectives on virtual consultation. Following each opening statement, I plan to turn the mic over to Mike Collins-Williams, who is going to moderate an open discussion, followed by a Q&A. I'd also like to ask the audience to consider questions and type these questions into the Q&A section of the menu bar below, and we'll do our best to get to all of your questions during the final segment of the webinar. Our first panelist is the president of the Ontario Professional Planners Institute, Justine Giancola. Justine is a registered professional planner, associate with Dillon Consulting, and president of the Ontario Professional Planning Institute. She has over a decade of experience in land use planning, municipal planning approvals, and environmental planning. Her professional practice specializes in planning policy, and she guides her clients through many of their toughest growth and policy decisions. Please welcome Justine Giancola.
Thanks, John, and thank you all for having me today. I'm calling in from sunny Kitchener, Ontario, and hopefully there's some sun wherever you're calling in across the province today. Just a quick 2-second about OPPI for those who are not familiar. We have just under 4,000 members across the province and represent members working in municipalities, in consulting firms, for developers, agencies, academia, the provincial government, and a whole variety of other spots. We always find niche planners working in a whole exciting area. And we regulate the registered professional planner designation, set academic and educational and examination requirements, and adhere to a code of practice. And the reason I want to mention this is that our code of practice indicates that we define our primary responsibility to define and serve the interests of the public. And 1.4 says identify and promote opportunities for meaningful participation in the planning process to all interested parties. And so I'm really excited to be part of this discussion today. It's timely and directly related with many of the issues that we have top of mind. So I do appreciate the invitation. We were asked to look at kind of the evolution of public engagement. And when I think about pre-pandemic, I do think we had a bit of an over-reliance on fairly standard public information centers. Our expectation was often that people would take time out of their busy day, that they would come to perhaps City Hall or maybe the basement of a local church or other community gathering place and provide their thoughts on a fairly narrow proposal. We often got input from the same few people who were able to show up. And when we started this pandemic over a year ago, right at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of the discussion of our members was really an immediate reaction to how do we do things now? How do we keep business moving? And one of the first, we actually launched a Forum Friday series similar to this kind of webinar. And one of the first topics we did was a how-to on public engagement, adapting virtual engagement under the Planning Act. And that was the one event that we saw the most participation by far, 588 registration to try to figure out overnight. A lot of municipalities had to overnight try to figure out how can we run our public meetings, engagement, all virtually. And reflecting back, I think there's been some pros and some cons out of this last year and a bit of experience. And so I'm excited to hear from my other panelists about their thoughts. To just share a few of mine, I think we've now gotten quite comfortable with our virtual modes. I think that we certainly have been able to achieve higher volume of input. You know, it's not rare to get 1,000 people submitting on a survey or hundreds of people showing up to a public event that perhaps we would struggle to have gotten more than tens out to before. So I think we're getting more breadth of input. I would venture to say more variety and diversity of perspectives. I think the other thing we have to be cautious though about is the depth of input. And, you know, it can be easy to use kind of vanity metrics to say, you know, we got 1,000 people, like that means we engage with 1,000 people. But as we're doing, you know, virtual engagement, the parameters that we're defining for engagement are fairly narrow and specific. And so we're asking someone a very specific question, and perhaps through multiple choice asking for feedback. You know, I question the conversation about meaningful and trying to make sure that we're still providing meaningful engagement. As we look to the future, I think I've certainly seen a number of elements of innovation in the way we do engagement, whether it is organizations getting community leaders, people with existing trusting relationships with certain parts of the population, compensating them to participate and get input and feedback from specific groups of let's say targeted engagement. But as we move forward and in-person options become available again, I think there certainly is going to be an expectation for virtual to continue. I think there will be new challenges with trying to run everything virtually and in person. I think the expectations will be all the methods. And I think that we would benefit from thinking about, there's an opportunity to think about how we see engagement from perhaps not just a point in time and a transaction or an extraction of knowledge from someone, but perhaps more, how do we build the trusting relationships that will allow us to get the value and input over time. And the last point I want to make is that while we've been in a global pandemic, we've also been in a human rights movement. And as we seek to address systemic racism and remove barriers, an equity lens is really critical. And it sometimes this means providing customized opportunities to reach an equal outcome. So we no longer can just provide the same options and assume that people are going to just show up and give us their valuable time. But we need to really think about who are those voices that are not at the table, and how do we bring them to the table, or how do we go out to get that input. And I'm going to just do a quick shout out for an event we have going on next week for OPPI for those who are interested. We're doing a Forum Friday on amplifying more voices in engagement, focused on engagement and equity. That's at 1:30 next Thursday on the 20th for anyone who's interested. Thank you, John. Back to you.
Thank you, Justine. Our second panelist is President of Molinaro Group, Vince Molinaro. Vince Molinaro is a dedicated senior officer and has played a significant role with his company in excess of 25 years, starting from general labor to his current position as president. Within his scope, he has overseen various large-scale, complex residential and commercial projects. He is proud of his roles as past president of WHBA, the OHBA, and also his recent induction into the West End Home Builders Association Hall of Fame. Please welcome Vince Molinaro.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. There are a lot of key milestones in the development application process, with public consultation as one of the most important, as it's the first time members of the public get to see our projects firsthand. A tremendous amount of time will have been invested to get to this point, including buying the land, assembling our team, commissioning the various studies, and spending hundreds of hours and significant dollars developing our plan with the goal to make it the best one possible. This process can take many years with much input and changes to get it to this point in time. We sometimes feel that this is our best foot forward, but as we know, this is not always the case. And we need the necessary feedback needs to be considered, and that could be realistic or otherwise. Some examples could be a dog run for local residents, adding an additional driveway to alleviate traffic on one of the streets fronting the project, or commercial space to help service a need. We know the main issues are always going to come up: height, density, traffic, parking, sun shadow, etc. These items are always front and center, be it a subdivision, infill, or a high-rise development. At the end of the day, if we developers want local support, it's up to us to decide what are the greatest needs that can be realistically incorporated into the development. Pre-COVID, the developer would host a public consultation meeting at a public venue with attendance in the 50 to 100 range, with many of the attendees more than happy to express their viewpoints. This is where the pitchforks usually come out, and people have no problem telling you exactly how they feel about your project, company, or even you personally. My company's had 2 virtual public consultations during the pandemic. Both were very large, multi-acre and multi-building sites. I fully expected the virtual numbers to be in the hundreds, as my thought was it's much easier for people to attend from a computer instead of in person, as this allows them a forum to offer even more comments, given the fact that they could do so faceless and from the safety of their homes. I was surprised when the exact opposite actually occurred. Both meetings had about 40 to 50 people attending at the peak, as people signed in and out as they wished. As the applicant and panelist, I had access to the real-time numbers as well as the names of the attendees. Most of the names were partial or short form, but it didn't take much for me to figure out who are my consultants, colleagues, and family members. Net result was about 20 actual residents in attendance, hardly what I expected. Selfishly, I could use these numbers to my advantage with city staff and state we more than met our obligation, and there was little or no opposition to the project. Realistically, if we're going to engage the public, we need to do it in a meaningful way with an open dialogue. I'm not sure if the public in our case felt less engaged and were dealing with more pressing matters, or felt that this format wasn't what they wanted or expected. What I do know is that there have been many complaints on the fact that meetings aren't held in a public realm. One of the biggest differences in our virtual consult is that the meeting was led by a third party instead of the developer. The city asked that we hire a communication specialist as the moderator. We thought this to be a novel idea and agreed. The one we hired did an excellent job explaining the format for the meeting, including timing, fact that chat was disabled so random comments couldn't be shared as a distraction, video was an option for delegates, strict restriction on rude, inappropriate comments, no repetitive questions, and 1 question per person with a follow-up only if time permitted. The moderator did this in a concise, calm, and friendly way, which brought the temperature in the virtual room way down. We did include a very informative PowerPoint presentation led by my architect and planner, and did have my study consultants on the call to answer potential questions. Difference is, in a public setting, people were more willing to engage with my team before and after the meeting in a more informal and friendly manner, as opposed to being put on the spot in a virtual setting. Allowing the public, especially those who join from home, time to review the drawings, renderings, studies, interact with our team before or after would certainly help in inviting more meaningful input. We've had the opportunity to see how both meetings worked, and a hybrid model of an in-person and virtual could work very well with an impartial third-party moderator and structure in place to fully engage and include all parties. Thanks for all attending today, and I look forward to answering some questions and dialoguing with my colleague panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Vince. A very neat perspective I hadn't thought of. Our next panelist is Sue Estelle, a co-president of Westell Homes, an award-winning family-owned home builder in London, Ontario, now in its 40th year of business. Sue is the president and executive member of the London Home Builders Association, second vice president of the board of directors for the Canadian Home Builders Association, and she is also chair of the CHBA Urban Council. Please welcome Sue.
Thank you. I am just going to share my screen. All right, can everyone see that okay? Great. All right, so I thought I'd just start out by sharing what we're experiencing in London. We're a home builder and land developer in the London and Elgin County area of southwestern Ontario. And what we're seeing is with COVID, London has mainly been operating with digital consultations after being one of the last communities to bring on digital meetings. They've included virtual meetings with city staff to find out more about applications and Zoom-based meetings with the applicant and planning staff as part of community meetings. In-person opportunities have been really limited due to the stay-at-home orders and reduced operations at City Hall. Our City Hall moved to pretty much full staff working at home since last March, and no one has come back since. The city has provided in-person duty planning and engineering services as much as they can, but which has been very limited. So some people can go in and ask questions. But again, it's very limited. Public participation meetings at planning and environmental committees have been operating on 2 different models. When the City Hall has been available, there has been areas for the public to be able to come into City Hall to participate in a separate committee room from where the council is. And the council is always on virtual. As well as now they have primarily moved to all virtual, participating on Zoom. So individual meetings and community meetings have been improving over the last year as members of the public, staff, and applicants have become more accustomed to using technology. We have seen a strong uptake for virtual meetings, and as well as getting email responses have come in very high. The city call volumes have not been as high as what they were expecting, but we feel that it's just because of people can participate more easily in all the virtual. On the Committee of Adjustment, administration now that they are able to move very quickly, doing from in-person meetings to digital meetings. So we are seeing that our timelines are becoming a little more smooth and quicker. And therefore we do see that staying this way into the future. So who's showing up to our public meetings? We are seeing, I would say, on average, more opposition. I'm seeing people just having more time on their hands, especially in some of our smaller communities. The face group pages just seem to be running rampant, and it really seems to be riling people up more so than we've ever seen before. And I honestly believe it's just because people are bored, and it just sort of snowballs into more and more opposition. We're also seeing more special interest groups showing up in these meetings. And I believe that, you know, the conservation, heritage, social housing groups are now seeming to be present at all meetings, and whether or not it is actually relative to the application, they just seem to be wanting to get in front of city staff and councillors and just sort of promote their own agendas. I will say though that people are coming in more informed, so they seem to be putting a bit more effort and time into their thoughts, and they do seem to get through their points and comments a little more quickly and then move on. We are seeing some people still ramble on, but due to the fact that they will sort of get cut off, I think, a little more easily virtually than they would have if they were standing in the council chambers or in another location. It does seem to be a little bit more effective. So some of the benefits, obviously, people can maintain anonymity. I think that certainly is a benefit as well as a drawback. But for some people who really don't enjoy or like speaking up in front of crowds, it does allow them to be able to provide some feedback and not have to sort of be afraid of speaking up. It's obviously easier for people to access to a certain degree, but they don't have to leave their house and so forth. We know all that. There's fewer arrangements required. So in some ways it's a little less expense that we have to endure. And certainly in our city areas, any public meetings, the actual layout of the room is very difficult for people to see. So just the actual structure of our city hall and how the council chambers are set up, it's very few people that sit there that can see what's even going on. So some drawbacks. So the logistics for running these virtual meetings can sometimes be challenging. Some members of the public prefer a webinar format. Others do not like that format, we've found, and can't be seen, not being able to be seen and not always being able to speak. Not everyone has the access to technology and knowledge of how the technology works. Lots of you're on mute, which I think everybody's getting really tired of. But it's also very concerning, obviously, for low-income families and seniors that otherwise may have put forth the effort to come in person. We feel that we are perhaps self-selecting certain segments of the population by just having virtual and not providing full access to everyone. And again, certainly some people feel more emboldened with virtual participation to say things that they wouldn't normally ever say in person. Some of our meetings have turned into yelling and swearing matches. I don't believe that people would actually treat others like that if they were standing there in person. So I feel that in the future, I anticipate PPMs will return to in-person, the traditional format when we get back to normal. It's challenging to run both an in-person meeting and digital participation at the same time. Again, in London, we have an older city hall. They are not set up to accommodate that through their technology. They're telling us that they think they would have to do 2 separate meetings, and we would be concerned that that would just add to our timelines if now we're scheduling in-person meetings as well as virtual meetings. I think that obviously as builders, we would way rather deal with people in person, that being staff as well as the public. We're able to communicate better. We've always had opportunities where we can set up, in church basements and malls and things like that, boards that the public is able to walk around and be able to ask questions, which this is not allowing for right now. I think I'll leave it there, and then I will look forward to some questions later.
Thank you, Sue. As an extreme extrovert as I am, I like your point about not being willing to come to stand at a mic. So it's perspective I've never thought of. Our final panelist is Steve Robichel, Chief Planner with the City of Hamilton. Steve's innovative and creative approach to complex planning issues and developing his staff's capacity to deliver innovative solutions has been recognized by the Canadian Institute of Planners, the Ontario Professional Planners Institute, and the Canadian Association of Certified Planning Technicians. Steve is the Vice Chair of the Regional Planning Commissioners of Ontario, a registered professional planner, and a graduate of McMaster University and the University of Toronto. Please welcome Steve Robichel.
Good morning, and thank you. I just have one slide I just want to put up. So hopefully everyone can see that. So here in Hamilton, we made the pivot from traditional public meetings to online public engagement and public participation last June, and we both in terms of our statutory and non-statutory public meetings. One of the things actually when we step back, and I often ask staff is, what is the purpose of the engagement program that we're launching? So very often parts of the engagement program, there's a marketing and an awareness element of it, just building interest in the community. Often when you're doing something very complex, like a growth management strategy that's got a 25 to 50-year time horizon, people don't understand that to the same degree as a minor variance application. So we will often look at how we can use online engagement and online tools just to help develop awareness about the work we're doing. So for example, with our land needs assessment and our growth management strategy, we actually started advertising on electronic digital billboards, just saying, coming soon. Are going to be some open houses and public meetings around the work that we're doing relating to that, and then moving forward in terms of the traditional print media and other social media to help promote the events so that people are aware of that. And I think that's enabled us, to reach a broader audience when we are doing our public engagement. We see people that are not only from the local immediate neighborhood that are affected by a development proposal, but they may be from other parts of the city. And now we're also getting people that they may be, coming from their cottage or their second home, or there's other stakeholder groups that are getting involved in participating in the process and bringing a different perspective to it. It's also making it, giving more people time for feedback. And it's also one of the other big benefits is that it allows us to be a little bit more efficient with our staff resources. There is a fair amount of, as we all know, staff time involved in setting up, organizing, and then tearing down from a public meeting, and then the reporting back that deals with it. And we found that we can be, the information that we can present can be just as effective as a traditional in-person public meeting, and that we've experimented with different breakout session works and breakout rooms in order for people to participate in the process. There are risks, or there are downsides with a lot of the, the virtual public participation, and some of the feedback we've been hearing about is, one is in terms of access. It's hard, Hamilton is a big city, it's an older city. There are people who used to go to the library or would come into City Hall to see a paper copy of the agenda. They do not have computers, or they do not have internet, or they do not have access to technology for them to participate. So it's always about, how do we ensure that everybody has equitable opportunity to participate in the process? And that's always a concern and a consideration into what we're doing. Whenever we do give out any notice, we have to make sure that they can either there's an email address and a telephone number. You can call in if you want to talk to somebody. Fortunately, we can't meet with you face-to-face at the counter, but we do try to make staff resources available so that if people have a question, or that they're not able to participate for whatever reason, or they choose not to participate through a virtual format, at least they can talk to a person. There's always that sort of Zoom fatigue and the boredom that sets in. During the day you're on Zoom meetings, the last thing when you come home at night, do you want to do another Zoom meeting? So that's a challenge. And how do you make it interesting? So often what I found is it's better to do a series of micro bursts. Instead of having 1 3-hour meeting, why not have 3 1-hour meetings? It just makes it a little bit easier to keep people engaged. And if people can't make the Monday meeting, they can at least participate on the Tuesday or the next week's meeting, or they can go away and they can ask some questions to deal with it. Consensus can often be difficult to negotiate or reach an agreement when you're not actually able to work people or have, talk to them individually. And how do you actually know if you get consensus in terms of the outcome of the meeting? And then often, there's that idea about the networking. It's funny when you watch a traditional public meeting, very often, especially during the winter, I notice this, people haven't seen their neighbors in months or weeks, it seems. So when we actually do have a PIC or an open house in a community, it really becomes as much a social event as why is the city here presenting some information? Very often, we have to ask people to leave at 9:30 because they haven't seen Bob or Mary in 6 months, and it gives them a chance to catch up with their friends. You do lose some of that community building and neighborhood connections by always in terms of these virtual meetings. And again, difficult time to build relationships. We have to be careful about the content in terms of how does it translate both into a virtual format, and how we can inform people and keep it dynamic and interesting. So we have to spend a bit more time in developing that content and ensuring that we sort of get the review that goes into it. And then sometimes, depending on the nature of the public meeting, if it's so programmed, it may not be flexible to respond to unforeseen circumstances. And technology failure can be the worst unforeseen circumstance. We had that recently with our committee of adjustment. Last week, we had to cancel our committee of adjustment meeting because the city's live stream system was not working. So, we weren't able to continue on with that meeting. There was approximately 35 applications that were due to be heard that day. So because we weren't able to broadcast to the general public so they could have participated or observed what was happening, in accordance with the city's procedural bylaw, we terminated the meeting, and we will have to reschedule that. So for the applicants, they've now been delayed by about 45 to 90 days until such time as we can reschedule that committee of adjustment meeting. And then finally, it's the ability to build trust. I find a lot of times, as other people have indicated, people may say something, they're comfortable in an email saying something that they wouldn't say normally in a face-to-face consideration, or you can't spend the time talking to them so that you can develop that relationship with them and help them sort of diffuse the issues. It's like the angry customer coming into the retail store because something's either out of stock or it's broken. Very often you just have to take that time to diffuse the situation, listen to the person, then hopefully you can have a meaningful conversation and engagement with them. Very often we will see that people will just be, sending in written comments or making commentary during these meetings and not being able to have that fulsome discussion in the conversation. So overall, I think I have to agree, some sort of hybrid model of public consultation is here to stay. We've been talking with our colleagues at the province to ensure, make the necessary modifications to the Planning Act to enshrine the opportunities for virtual public meetings and public consultation. It's not clear in the Planning Act right now. It's a bit of a gray area. The province has put out some guidance materials saying that municipalities can do virtual public consultation and should develop accordingly the correct official plan policies. But we do have a situation. It was a different committee of adjustment matter where because of technology issues, a couple of the residents weren't able to participate. The committee members felt that because they had already received some written comments, they knew the community was opposed to the minor variance application. The committee went ahead and made a decision on it. One of the residents appealed the Committee of Adjustment decision to the LPAT, and our council has actually directed our legal staff to attend at that LPAT hearing to argue on procedural grounds that that Committee of Adjustment decision was not valid because people could not participate on it from a technological perspective. So it's sort of going to be an interesting sort of test case to see what the outcome of that is and how the LPAT decides. They may decide that since everyone is at the LPAT hearing, it doesn't matter, or it may be one of those watershed moments that says, yes, the Planning Act, as it was written or stood in 2021, did not allow for virtual statutory public meetings, and then all of the meetings that have held to date may essentially be invalid. So those are sort of the two options. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And interesting perspective for sure from the city's perspective. I'm going to hand it over to Mike Collins-Williams now, who's going to run the question period. So take it away, Mike.
Thank you, everybody. That was some very insightful comments and presentations. Certainly a diversity of perspectives in what's been a pretty interesting year. So that brings me to my first question. Now that we're a year into this, has virtual public consultations sort of settled into a fairly predictable pattern and framework, or are you still seeing it evolve and change with new ideas to approaching consultation now that we're, I guess, 14 or 15 months into this? Just throw that open to anybody.
I'll start. Oh, go ahead, Justine. Okay, I'll start. I would say that we're in London seeing things really settle down now. People are going with the flow. They've got everything set up. The public has become more aware of the process, and our participation levels are increasing. I think we are starting to see more diversity in the respondents and their ideas, primarily because I think, again, with the latest shutdown, again, with people having more time on their hands, there's getting more talk out there. So I'm not anticipating any future real big changes in the next few months from us.
And maybe just to add, I think that certainly a lot of people have worked out the kinks, like the operational kinks of running things virtually. But I think we're still seeing innovation in terms of new methods to try to reach certain target populations or stakeholders, and whether that is through, I think that the example I provided previously where you have, community leaders, part of, being identified to be, to take certain messages and educational information out. They're compensated for that. They're gaining feedback and then bringing it back into the process. That's one example of kind of a slightly different method of getting some targeted feedback. And, I think you could do a similar thing for, I saw a question come in about youth populations. I think that, utilizing existing youth groups or pre-existing groups that have kind of a trusting relationship already built, as opposed to trying to create, brand new stakeholder committees or these sorts of things can be really valuable. So I think there's certainly still innovation, but I would also say that everybody is very tired in general, I think, in life. So that's probably having some impact on innovation too.
So I'm going to ask a rather blunt and perhaps not politically correct sort of question by stating the painfully obvious fact that prior to COVID, public consultation for planning applications typically brought out a very specific demographic to public meetings. And somehow this process with narrowly defined local interest represented by that specific demographic who shows up time and time again at public meetings was supposed to represent the public interest. Yet there's all kinds of other voices. I think diversity has been mentioned a number of times so far, as well as some of the challenges with virtual platforms potentially even being exclusionary to other members of the public. So, with all the kinds of different voices and perspectives that, aren't necessarily well represented at public meetings, who may feel excluded by the planning process, in your view, has virtual public consultation provided more opportunities for a greater diversity of interests, or is it still the same people showing up?
Mike, I don't mind feeling that one. The bottom line is people generally don't come out in favor of development projects. It's just a fact of life. Our projects are very, we have large buildings, several hundred units. You figure just that alone would attract a few people. It doesn't. You'd stand to reason that local businesses would benefit from a development nearby their business. They don't show up. They're especially during COVID, they're obviously busy. They're struggling. They're working 24/7, even without a pandemic, trying to keep their businesses going. The only ones that show up every time is the people in opposition. How do you fix that? I don't know. I'd like to see, even Chamber of Commerce and BIAs. Why aren't they more involved? Why? I guess nobody wants to stick out their line for developers. Nobody wants to be painted with the brush that we are. We're big bad guys. I love to see maybe Steve's perspective, but like I said, it's not set up in a way that is in our favor.
Thanks, Vince. What I'm finding is I think there's sort of two camps, right? There's the traditional group who attend, they speak, and they participate directly in the public meetings. What I'm seeing, though, when we start looking at who's sort of at the virtual public meeting, there's a lot of people sort of on a watching brief that are attending. They're watching, but they're not speaking. So that might be, the BIA, another property owner, an NGO or some other group that they do have an interest, but for whatever reason, they're choosing not to participate in that actual event. And they may then follow up with written correspondence or separate, reach out to the planner the morning after to have a conversation about what's happening and to express their opinion. I think very often these public meetings are still being used as a platform to give sort of the quote unquote, the average citizen an opportunity to speak and express their opinions either for or against a proposal. One of the changes I think though we did see though, especially when we were working through our land needs assessment, was for some groups were able to bring in additional resources to the conversation that may not necessarily have participated if they were in terms of those discussions. So we had other people that we have never spoken or never attended, never sent letters in on dealing with our official plan review and our municipal comprehensive review, but they were participating in the process because we opened it up to anybody essentially who had a computer. So you could be anywhere in Ontario, anywhere in Canada, anywhere in North America, really anybody who could participate, who would wanting to participate in the process. So that's sort of a bit of a different, we're getting some different voices, some different ideas being brought to the table. But I do still think that at the end of the day, the people who are speaking, it has been syndicated, or people who have a concern about what is being proposed with the development project.
Steve, you mentioned, access to computers. So there's a question in the chat here that sort of speaks to that. It's saying, during the pandemic, have any of you successfully engaged communities with no or limited internet access? And if you have, how have you done that?
So in Hamilton's context, what you may or may not know is, as part of our official plan review process, in terms of looking at our land needs assessment, council directed actually that we do a mail out survey, a traditional survey to every single household in the city of Hamilton. And that'll be going out, I think, probably next week or shortly in the next 2 weeks. We're simply going to be asking property residents a question based on the different growth options. What's your choice? Do you like A, B, C, or D? And to mail back the response. So we are using that very, very traditional tool to solicit public feedback, as well as on the various growth options, as well as we have the online tools and people having the opportunity to participate in the virtual public meetings. So we're not seeing the virtual public meeting as the only means for engaging with the public. It's just one more tool that's available to us. Some people they want to be able to just download the information from the computer and read it at their own time, and then they might provide a letter or an email into council if they have any concerns on the issue. Other people want to participate and speak at a meeting, and then we're going to try this mail out survey to see how the feedback is. So there's about 225,000 households we will be mailing out the survey form to. And if we get 3 to 5% response rate, we will see. I think that's what we're hoping to obtain in terms of response rate based on other surveys, and we'll see what the public feedback is. We do have that opportunity to participate with other groups. I mean, just before COVID hit, we were trying to engage with the youth community on our Bayfront strategy. We had a series of things organized, where we would try to engage that community. We had to sort of stop because of COVID. But we did shift with that group to doing some online consultation, and that was very successful for the youth community because they were sort of plugged into their phones. There was other groups though, who, like I said, still like to come into City Hall. They still want to look at a paper agenda. They sit there, they don't really speak. That's how they monitor what's happening at the city. And then they may or may not just then follow up with a letter. So it's all part of that continuum of public consultation tools. Thank you.
Another question from the chat here. How can we ensure, given the anonymity of the virtual format, some of people have their names up, other people don't, sometimes with their screens off. How do you sort of differentiate between folks from the community versus organized special interest groups from using the process as a conduit to advance a particular viewpoint or political agenda? And I think, to add a second related comment to that, with some of these organized groups, you have people that aren't even in the community coming in and voicing their opinions about what should happen in a particular community. Don't jump in all at once.
I know in London, before you speak, you have to say your address. At least then you can always make up an address, but if you're being truthful, then you would know if that person is actually relative to the conversation or not. But that's about all I think we can do.
Question, there's a lot of questions now coming in. So one that just came in for each of the panelists. Do you often see public meetings, and quote, derailed essentially by sometimes a particular community member that has the most vested interest in a project, such as an immediate next door neighbor that is weighted higher than the interest of potential future citizens that could be living or working in that proposed development? Have virtual public meetings made any of the potential imbalance between interests become more balanced through an equilibrium by it being a different process?
So maybe, speaking from Hamilton's perspective, we don't see the statutory public meeting. I mean, that's where people do have to give their name, their address to preserve their rights of appeal. So you really have to be who is speaking if you think that you may want to file an appeal. I often, in a perfect world, that should be the non-event, in the sense that that is where council will be hearing, on the technical issues, what were some of the issues and the concerns that have been raised and how are they being addressed. And most times at that point, there is nobody there speaking in against an application, even pre-COVID or during the COVID, because all of the issues and concerns have been resolved early in the process. So the non-statutory public meetings at the beginning of the process to engage with the community, present the proposals, hear back from the community, make adjustments, file the application. We give the notice of the complete application, give the public an opportunity to write in or email and express what their issues or concerns are, and which very often will align with issues or concerns that staff have, work with the applicant to address those issues. If it's still, depending on the nature of the application, there may be another non-statutory meeting in the community, whether it's virtual or not, to further talk about the revised proposal, hear from the community again and how the issues have been responded to, and then come forward with the final statutory public meeting, which is really just a process, and that because all of the issues have been resolved. When we follow that model, we don't have these issues where somebody trying to derail or hijack the public meeting because they don't feel that their issue or concern has been resolved. And very often though, council will say, if they're speaking about an issue, staff can speak to it. But I do find that by having that earlier consultation with the community and then being able to demonstrate what you heard and how you responded to their issues, the back end of the process almost becomes very routine and administrative, as opposed to the statutory public meeting at the end of the process is not where you want to find out there's a new issue that the staff weren't aware of or the applicant wasn't aware of and hasn't been resolved. Thank you.
So how does the future look for public engagement and public meetings? Do you think that we're just going to go back to the way it used to be as if the last year never happened? Or do we stay virtual? Or do you see it as being some sort of hybrid?
I think it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle. Once you offered a virtual meeting, it'd be extremely difficult to backtrack from that. I agree with my colleagues. I think we all agreed we love to be in person, even it doesn't have to be a formal delegation. We're happy to stick around before or after with our consultants for hours sometimes, and just to speak it through, and it becomes quite friendly at that point. You can easily resolve things, but you're going to have to offer some kind of virtual. I hope people try to come in person, but like I said, I think the cat's out of the bag on that one.
And my concern, just to add to that, is just timelines. If we are going to do a hybrid version, as long as it's not affecting timelines of projects, having to offer more opportunities, we have long timelines to begin with. If this is, I hope that this isn't just going to be an excuse to extend.
We're coming up on the last few minutes. A couple more questions have come in. So there's a question, and Steve, you sort of touched on it, the statutory public meetings versus the pre-submission public consultation meetings that seem to occur in some municipalities but don't occur in other municipalities. So and sometimes these meetings can be contentious, as sometimes being so early in the process. There can be benefits, but there can be drawbacks. So do any of you have any suggestions on pre-submission consultations and how well that's working virtually or not working virtually, and some thoughts on the pre-submission versus the statutory? Okay.
So I would say that, I mean, as part of our complete application requirements, we require applicants to give us sort of their public consultation, public engagement strategy, depending on the nature of the application. So if it's a farm related severance and you're just rezoning the property, the surplus farm dwelling, we just, knock on your neighbor's doors, tell them what you're doing. So when they get the letter from the city, they're not reacting to something. Where it is much more controversial project, then clearly that's where more public consultation early in the process can lead to a positive outcome. So, and then to look at what's going to be the most effective means of that consultation. So, and that may be simply reaching out to the neighborhood association, speaking with the ward councillor, and then making your decision as to how best to proceed. Because I think you have to tailor it based on the nature of the application and ultimately what you're trying to achieve and how, how it's going to play out in the process. But in most cases, if it's going to be fairly controversial, I think having that earlier engagement and informing the ward councillor as early as possible goes a long way to resolving a lot of the issues, because to get that letter in the mail from the city, people are reacting to, right? One of the good things though that we had some controversial, early pre-submission meetings is where we require people essentially to, use the chat function to ask their question. It gives us that record. So we know, so we can't get somebody to say 6 months later, we had a public meeting, they never answered the questions. We've got that permanent record. So there are some of those benefits, and it also allows us to go back and make sure that all of the issues or the questions that have been asked have somehow they've been addressed. So it does help in that process by providing that documentation so that it gives council, they can ask the question, well, did so-and-so ask about this, or how are you going to address those issues? Yes, they did ask those questions. Here was the response was given, and here's how it's been responded to in the staff report. So it does help inform in developing that public record from that perspective. And I think that earlier consultation, like I said, it avoids the surprises or the unknown elements. And then it can also allow for some, different approaches, if it's going to be, if it's depending on the nature of the project, I've seen people, they come up with some little videos, they try to make it a little bit more animated and less being like an infomercial. I think those ones are the ones to stay away from. I've had a few people say they've gone to, a developer initiated pre-application and open house, and they felt it was a 30-minute infomercial. There was no opportunity to ask questions. It was a waste of their time. That type of consultation doesn't work. If the intent was simply just to introduce the project and then tell people next week we're going to have a working session, lay out that roadmap so people know. and it also to make sure it's very clear so people know they can stand down, relax. They're not having to watch, their inbox or their mailbox every day for a notice. You can, if you be very clear, and we always try to do that, publish the roadmap and how they see the project coming forward, when there be opportunities for the public consultation and reporting back, and how to make that information available, whether it's on a project website, mailing the reports. I know some people have actually had to hand deliver the materials. I've seen that some of the planning consultants, they put together their public consultation guide and they submit it to the city saying this is how we're going to be engaging with the community, and they will say they will do a walk around mail out. If people can't access it electronically, they will hand deliver a copy of the planning justification report or the plans to somebody's mailbox. That goes a long way in building trust within the community and addressing some of those other issues, whether it's people having a technological barrier or they simply an economic issue, they don't have a computer or their computer is so old they can't open up the drawings. When you're offered to do that, I find that builds, the people really appreciate that. And then you get people standing up at the statutory public meeting saying, yeah, Terry did a great job in her consultation. We came to her, she had 3 open houses, thumbs up to Terry, she listened. That's what council wants to hear, right? And that leads to a successful project because then the community is buying in and becoming a partner in the development of that project. Thank you.
And I'm just going to jump in. It really is about trust and information sharing. And something that you just mentioned, I don't think we've talked about, is the community portals that we're all putting on our websites and creating an ongoing message of all of the reports that are submitted as part of complete application. We set up an email. They can email us directly with questions. I think all of that in the information age is something that's really important. And it also goes to, recognizing there is issues with accessibility to computers, but if people do have it, Steve, they don't have to go to City Hall to get that paper copy. They're going in, looking at the reports, and it is open communication, which is really important. And I also want to say, yes, we do the hand delivery of letters. It is something that we do quite often, or we mail out letters the old way. So that people actually have our phone number. They can call us and we're happy to chat with them about projects as well as part of our public consultation strategy.
So I think that's all the time we had today. Unfortunately, we only booked an hour because we didn't want to take all of your time away during the day. I see lots of other questions and chats, and I apologize that we weren't able to get to every single one of them. But I'd like to do a huge thank you to our panelists, Justine, Vince, Sue, and Steve, for their informative and timely information today. And thank you very much to all of our attendees that have come and given us their valuable time to listen, answer questions, and have a good discussion. I'll turn it over to Mike to finish off.
And a huge thank you to you, John, as our gold partner, MTE Consultants. Our association certainly would not be able to put together great events like today without your ongoing support. So thank you, John. And of course, to all of our members who've taken the time out of their busy schedules to join us today. Certainly appreciate all the great questions that have come in. It's always great on these formats where it's very quiet, and then as soon as the questions start coming in, it's an overwhelming wave. So huge interest in this topic. So thank you again to the members. Thank you to Steve, Justine, Vince, and Sue. Really appreciate your time. And enjoy the rest of your day. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.